on with me just gave me such a passion to try to understand the body and understand nutrition as much as I possibly could, get myself healthy so then I could pay it forward to others. So I love what I do. So glad that I switched careers, and it's just the beginning. But I'll let Dr. Mike introduce himself. I'll just give a quick introduction to Dr. Mike. He was my professor at University of Bridgeport and is amazing. I learned so much from his classes, and he's going to give us so much useful information today, but I'll let him introduce himself. Dr. Mike.
Thanks, Lindsey. So my name is Dr. Mike Jurgowitz. I've been a clinician the past 17 years. I have 3 board certs in clinical nutrition, and I've been teaching in academia the last 8 years. My expertise has mainly been laboratory assessments and nutritional therapeutics, and as well as formulating nutraceutical and botanical interventions for the prevention, modulation, and management of different chronic conditions. The last 10 years, I've been involved with the nutraceutical industry, overseeing and leading product development, research coordination, as well as our clinical and technical support at Designs for Health. So I'm the director of product development, research, and clinical support. And why I really wanted to talk on this topic is because, you know, autoimmunity is probably like 80% of what I deal with patients, because this is what falls through the cracks of traditional medicine. And these individuals are not being told that they can change the trajectory of their health with diet, lifestyle, and nutritional therapeutics. So I hope between both of us today, we can kind of shed some light on to some of those different environmental factors, and then how things from a dietary standpoint, as well as from a fiber standpoint, affect the gut, and how this may be able to help you.
Awesome. That is really great that you said that, because it's so true that lifestyle, although technically autoimmune diseases can't be cured, they can be put into remission, and lifestyle and diet does a wonderful job. I've just seen so many life changes, and I've felt the life changes personally from incorporating some of the things that we're about to share today. So I can go ahead and share my screen. Oh my gosh, I totally should have practiced this before we started the webinar, but I think I see the button here. So you can just let me know if you can see my screen. I'm clicking share screen. All right, can you see it?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, great. I didn't want to share it. I wanted to click slideshow. Okay. So today we are talking specifically about how fiber is critical to anyone that's a human being, really, but especially if you have an autoimmune condition, fiber becomes so critical to your healing journey. So these are some of the questions that I'll be answering throughout the presentation. But if you don't see your question up here, these are almost word for word some of the questions that were given to us. If you don't see your question up here, it doesn't mean we won't be answering it, because Dr. Mike will also be answering a list of questions. And a lot of these questions had overlap in them. So anything from the best sources of AIP fiber, I have a mini visual reference of some food to give you an idea of what it might look like. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about SIBO and IBS and fiber and how that can kind of all fit together, as well as the question that always gets asked, how much fiber is too much fiber? And we'll also talk about specific types of fibers. So this is something that I really wanted to start with, even though I touched on it one of our last webinars, just how critical our gut health is to every area of our health. As the ancient philosopher Hippocrates said, disease begins in the gut. And the more research that comes out, the more we're realizing that, wow, there's really something to that. And specifically, it's the types of bacterial species in our gut and the amounts of them and the levels of them that are influencing pretty much everything about us, from our hormones to our metabolism, our levels of body fat. And I bolded and underlined this: disease, development, and progression. And it has been so mind-blowing. Like, some people, I really just want to be like, just eat more fiber and so many issues would go away. So fiber is really important. Okay, so what is fiber? Well, typically you're going to find your fibers almost always in your carbohydrate food sources, but these are the non-digestible components and typically in plant-based foods. So we actually don't absorb fiber in our intestines, and you can see the picture here on the right. You can see all of that. Look at all of that tubing that our food has to go through. as it goes in one end and out the other. And it usually takes, maybe about a day on average to go in one end and out the other, just to kind of put that into perspective for you. So yeah, it has a long transit in the intestinal tubing, but fiber is not absorbed through, most of our food is absorbed in that first part of our small intestine called the duodenum, but fiber is not absorbed. And humans actually lack enzymes to digest our fiber. And so you hear prebiotics, probiotics, postbiotics, and it confuses a lot of people, but just to put it simply, fiber is a prebiotic. It is food for our good gut, or for our gut bacteria, period. And our gut bacteria are known as the probiotics. And that then produces, as the bacteria feeds on the fiber, it produces short chain fatty acids, which are known as postbiotics. And these postbiotics are so, so key to our health. You might have heard of butyrate, acetate. These are examples of short chain fatty acids. Sometimes you'll see SCFA written for short. And they are so important for our brain health. They're basically like signaling molecules. They can help to prevent our brain from degenerating. They can promote the regeneration of new brain cells. So think about that. Eating your vegetables can help you to think better, can help you to really reverse a lot of conditions, not just in the brain, because some of these short chain fatty acids, especially butyrate, are needed to maintain a healthy gut lining. And what we know is that impairments of the gut lining, sometimes you'll hear the phrase leaky gut getting thrown around in the research. It's often referred to as intestinal hyperpermeability. That is a key driver of autoimmunity. And so for anyone with an autoimmune condition, making sure the gut is healthy is absolutely critical, hence the importance of fiber. So there are different types of fiber. People hear the word fiber and they think it's just one thing, but no, there's soluble fibers, there's insoluble fibers. And then when we talk about even within those categories, there's subcategories of that. So in the soluble fiber, you have pectins, you have mucilages, and then soluble fibers. Sometimes resistant starch is lumped in with insoluble fibers, but you also have cellulose. And so people sometimes get confused with, okay, what's the difference? Do I need one more than the other? One thing I want to point out, just to simplify things for you, is pretty much most fiber sources are not just soluble fiber or just insoluble fiber. They usually have a mix, but certain foods might have a little bit more soluble than insoluble. So really, yes, you need both. But as you see under the soluble fibers, you have apples there, and you also have apples under insoluble fibers. And one way to think about it is soluble fibers attract water. So think about things where if you put water in them, they expand. So oats is typically not on an AIP diet, although not out of the question that if you're on AIP for a long period of time and you want to try a reintroduction phase down the road, that you might be okay with some of these grain foods. Although I would probably steer a little bit more towards maybe the quinoas if you wanted to start with a reintroduction, such as the non-gluten containing grains, but that's for another topic. And anything that attracts water is considered soluble fiber. Now, soluble fiber, one of the big differences between that and insoluble is that will slow down your digestion and absorption, whereas insoluble fiber will accelerate the intestinal transit of food. But they're both needed, and we need both kind of in balance, and we need both of them to ensure a healthy gut. They have their benefits. They kind of work together to ensure a really healthy gut. A lot of times it's the soluble fibers that are what the gut bacteria are feeding on and fermenting. And for that reason, the soluble fibers have the tendency to sometimes produce a little bit more gas. But the thing is, if your gut is healthy, you shouldn't have to worry about eating fiber and feeling super bloated. If your gut is not healthy, this is when you might notice, oh, wow, when I eat certain fibers, I get really bloated. Now, it is totally normal to have some bloating going on when you're eating a little bit, right? But there are some people that get uncomfortable bloating, severe amounts of bloating. That's when we start to think, okay, there's probably some overgrowths going on in the gut that's causing this abnormal and overreaction to these fiber type foods. So you're going to see more about how you deal with that in a second. So what I want you to see is that fiber is at the foundation of how you function, and it improves our blood sugar control. It helps to lower cholesterol and triglycerides. It helps you to feel more full and sends satiety signals into the body. And it also, like I mentioned, is really key to our brain health and keeping healthy body fat levels And all of this translates to better metabolic health and reduced inflammation, which also has a big tie into autoimmunity. Because if you're metabolically healthy, that's really, really important to keeping any kind of an immune dysregulation at bay or to keep a flare up at bay. And so the big takeaway here is that including balanced amounts of all types of fiber to feed all the good gut bacteria species and to ensure that there's balanced levels, that's what's key. But here's the beautiful thing. You don't need to sit there and track how many grams of soluble and insoluble fiber you ate. All you need to do to keep it simple is, there's those simple sayings, eat the rainbow. And I like to tell my clients to get 5 servings of veggies and fruits a day. And, a serving could be anywhere from a half a cup to a cup, just to keep it really simple. And if you're doing that, and if you're including diversity of fruits and vegetables, I like to tell people stick a little bit more to the veggies than the fruits, just for blood sugar purposes. But honestly, I just want people to get their nutrients in sometimes. So I'll start by just saying, get 5 servings of veggies and fruits a day. I put veggies before fruits though. And if you are just constantly rotating and trying new veggies and new fruits, you'll do it. So big takeaway here, goal is always to include as much fiber as possible, up to 50 grams. I would say that's kind of my educated opinion. But it is founded in the research. And I know Dr. Mike will also share his thoughts and share some research on that. But hardly anyone is doing 50 grams. And now if you're getting over 25 is the recommendation, and I tell people that's the bare minimum. If we look at what people are eating, it is way under that, yet most people are sick. So it makes sense, right? So we know that to stave off diseases, you do need fiber in the diet. And the fact that people are just not getting it, it really does explain why a lot of us are metabolically unhealthy today. Diversity. Now I put a little asterisk there because I wanted to remember to say that it should be, diversity of plant sources, but I'm not telling you to go, have potato chips or even like, kale chips. Not that kale chips are bad, like if they're coming out of a bag, like I absolutely, I'll eat those things, but I don't want people to think that will offer you the same benefit as eating some lightly cooked kale. The food as close to its whole form is always the best way to go. Now, here's the question a lot of people want to know. But what if I have SIBO and IBS and fiber makes me bloated or worse? Great question. So I always start here. You have to know what is your why, meaning what is the reason that you're feeling bloated and uncomfortable when you're eating the fiber? This goes back to root cause. This is really what functional medicine is all about, figuring out your root cause. Now, it takes time to figure out someone's root cause, and the standard medical model does not lend itself to that very well, which is why I'm very passionate about what I do, because I really believe that you need to spend time getting to understand a person and their history before you can offer a proper solution. And so what I ask people and what I try to go through with them is, how much of your food is processed, packaged, or from restaurants? If it's more than 25%, we need to address it. And that's just my, that's not like, oh, the research shows that, but that's kind of, what I believe. Are you not getting enough fiber? If you're getting less than 30 grams a day, we need to, so let me put it like this. We might temporarily need to manipulate your fiber. If you're getting bloated every time you're eating a bunch of fiber, maybe you use some herbal antimicrobials, but we want to know, why did you get in this mess in the first place? Was it because you had years where you were only eating 10 grams of fiber a day, which is very common? Are you not drinking enough water? I always have my water here. I would say about 3/4 a gallon of water a day is really what most people should be drinking, sometimes a little bit more, because you need water to push the fiber through your system. Did you go, maybe you listen to this webinar, you're like, oh, Lindsey said I need to be eating 50 grams of fiber a day. Right now I'm only eating 10. So tomorrow, here we go. I'm going 50 grams. No, do not do that. You will not like me if you do that. You have to go slow and steady. I would say if you're only eating 10 grams of fiber a day, you would want to, maybe over the course of a couple months, maybe 3 months, try to gradually get yourself to above 40, because it's going to take time for your bacterial levels to adjust. Otherwise, you will feel really bloated. And it's not necessarily that something's wrong with you. It's just, hey, that would happen to anyone. So you got to go slow with the increase in fiber. Are you not getting enough plant diversity and different types of fiber. You need all the different types of fiber to feed all the different bacterial species. Do you have a history of PPIs or acid suppressing medications? Those can really wreak havoc on health if taken long term. And unfortunately, not a lot of people realize that. And so also, if you're eating while you're stressed, that can impair digestion and cause dysbiosis, essentially, which is overgrowth of bacteria or SIBO. Are you not chewing your food? I see people do this all the time. People are like, you eat so slow. They always tell me that. I'm like, no, you eat too fast. You got to really chew your food. Low stomach acid. You could have low stomach, you can have acid reflux, and that can be from low stomach acid. People don't realize that because sometimes that flap that's supposed to keep the esophagus and the stomach separated, that weakens, and then the little bit of stomach acid that is there goes up. The stomach is supposed to be acidic for a reason, because we need that to digest our protein in our foods, and it also has antimicrobial properties. Are your pancreatic enzymes too low? Do you not have enough of the brush border enzymes, which are released from the small intestine? And that could be, a side result of having dysbiosis as well. And then also, if you do have these overgrowths and maybe your GI doc said you have SIBO or whatever they said, then you probably do need a little bit more of a strategic game plan. And this can be phases. A lot of times you'll hear about the 4R protocol, which is first where, you remove the pathogens. And sometimes that can be done. It can be done with antibiotics. A lot of times in the functional space, we'll try to see if we can do it with some herbal antimicrobials first, some plant-based compounds that can help to restore the levels of your gut bacteria. And that won't totally wipe things out as harshly as antibiotics will. But it is ironic that excessive use of antibiotics can lead to SIBO, but sometimes people treat SIBO with antibiotics. Things are complicated, right? And a lot of times this 4R protocol will involve gut repair nutrients, because the lining of the gut, it needs certain nutrients in order to be able to heal, most notably glutamine, zinc, carnosine, sometimes slippery elm, aloe. A lot of these professional grade products, supplements, they will have gut repair supplements to help you. So just for the sake of not going too much longer, I'll probably just skip through a couple of slides, and maybe at the end, if someone wants to hear more in depth about any one of these topics that I want to speak about, then you can ask, and we'll be happy to circle back and talk about these. But just in essence, I just have a research study here about low FODMAP diet for people with IBS. And a lot of times IBS and SIBO go hand in hand, and they also go hand in hand with digestive troubles and bloating. Basically, think about a low FODMAP diet as a tool in the toolbox, but it is not a long-term solution. And you can end up running into more problems if you're on this for a long-term period of time, more than several months. I can see how it could extremely benefit someone that is eating these higher FODMAP foods and then getting bloated. And if you don't know if you're like, wait, what is FODMAP? Sometimes I forget. People don't live in the health world all day. FODMAP is just a fancy term. Oh my gosh, let me see if I can remember it. Fermentable oligosaccharide, disaccharide, mono, and polyols, something like that. All of those fancy terms are types of different fibrous carbohydrates that bacteria can feed on and produce excessive amounts of gas and bloating if they're overgrown. So if someone is put on a low FODMAP diet, they'll be told, okay, avoid some of these foods. And what I suggest to people is, hey, if you want to try a low FODMAP diet for a couple weeks, you might find you feel some great relief and your bloating goes down. Great. But work on figuring out, why did you get there in the first place? Don't just go on a low FODMAP diet without figuring out how you got in the mess in the first place. And you will notice that there are different types of fibers that have different effects in the gut. Someone asked about Metamucil. So that was really one of the reasons why I threw this study up, because psyllium is the main compound in Metamucil. And it actually does have a decent amount of research showing that it can help with IBS and reduce symptoms and improve the quality of life in people. However, this is the screenshot of the back of a Metamucil can. And yep, there it is. There's a psyllium fiber. But I personally wouldn't just say, oh, you're bloated or constipated or have diarrhea, take Metamucil. I'd want to know, okay, why? Do we need some herbal antimicrobials? Do we need to address peristalsis, which is the movement of food through the gut? And maybe, the migrating motor complex has been dysregulated, and maybe we need to look at meal timing. So I would want to know the why first rather than just, throw Metamucil at someone. And I would prefer someone looks at how much fiber they're eating first and see maybe sometimes all that's required is, oh, this person just needs to increase their fruit and vegetable intake and some of these good fiber-based foods, and that will solve it for them. Now, I'm open to people taking fiber supplements for, short periods of time, or if they're going on vacation and they're like, I'm just not going to eat my veggies on vacation. Okay. But I'm not a fan of some of these ingredients in here, the aspartame and the yellow 6. Some of these dyes, I would just prefer that someone doesn't incorporate those if possible. I'm a fan of the saying the dosage makes the poison, but I do think that there's enough research to say, hey, let's not have those if we can help it. So again, the reason why I'm saying, yeah, you can have it, but figure out what your why is. And I'll end with this. Here are some AIP compliant fiber sources. So you have your broccoli, a half a cup to a cup might be about 5 to 7 grams. Some berries. I love coconut products like coconut flakes. That's a great source of fiber. Pumpkin, I get canned pumpkin, and it is really, really great. I kind of make like a parfait with like berries and pumpkin and coconut flakes. I'll put that in. Avocado is a great source of fiber, and you might be familiar with these two pictures up top. This is from Paleo on the Go. This is their bacon apple chicken burger, which is a staple in my household. We eat it all the time. And the salmon is another one of my favorites, and there's some great fiber with the cal. So I will stop my share so that I can turn it over to Dr. Mike, and then if anyone wants me to go more in depth with some of the. Right, Dr. Mike.
Thank you, Lindsay. Let me just do the share here. See my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Let me just go to presenter mode here. You see my full screen now?
Yep, perfect.
Okay. Yeah, so these are a few of the questions that came through that I'm going to cover over my next, say, 15 minutes or so. But really, when we think about autoimmunity, like how do these begin? What are some of the environmental factors that contribute to it? And how do we look at that? What are some of the different tests that you can potentially consider asking your integrative practitioner for, or GI doctor, or traditional doctor, nutritionist? I'm going to cover a little bit on fiber, even though Lindsay covered the majority of it. She did a good comprehensive job looking at it. And then I know some individuals were interested in specifically, can certain probiotic strains be beneficial in autoimmunity, and how does that play a role with gut health? And then other times there's going to be individuals that may not tolerate fiber as well. Let's say you have an autoimmune issue like Crohn's disease or something, where in some acute type exacerbations, you may want some sort of alternative for that. So we'll look at some of those things that we can consider there. So one of the things that I like really showing people is these different environmental influences. So when you think about autoimmunity, it's not usually just this genetic predisposition. I mean, we have a genetic predisposition that we can't change, obviously, but it's this epigenetic component where it's how are all these other things from the environment filtered through that gene and increasing that risk. So it's really a perfect storm of things that occur. And how we look at it is it's usually this chronic stimulation, and the immune system gets overwhelmed and it loses that ability to function, and we have to kind of get those things back. So as far as what are those things, they could be stress, hormone imbalances, a lot of the stuff that Lindsay talked about with like dysbiosis, by not having the optimal commensal or beneficial bacteria in the gut. There can be some other opportunistic or pathogenic bacteria, fungus, yeast, etc. But then there can also be other types of infections. A lot of people are eating the Western type diet. There's other toxins. There can also be different adjuvants and things that can play a role as well. But it's more about, how does this really begin? And I guess what I would say is autoimmunity is often a clinical diagnosis where they look at your symptoms and they combine it with testing what are these called these autoantibodies. And every specialty has different autoimmune conditions. So those doctors, and oftentimes you see a lot of rheumatologists that are doing it. But the interesting thing is these autoantibodies that get made by the immune system are actually present before there's clinical symptoms. So they actually are like predictors of future disease. So for example, someone that has Hashimoto's thyroiditis, there's a 7 to 10 year window where those antibodies will show up in the blood before their TSH ever gets affected. And so we have an opportunity to kind of almost screen some of these antibodies, just like you would get your annual checkup with your primary care doctor, get a CBC, a lipid panel, metabolic panel. And it's a way to see if you're positive for any of these things, because then you're at risk. If you know you have a 97% chance in 7 to 10 years to have an autoimmune thyroid issue, then you can change the environment and kind of turn off that expression and that dysfunction. So we're not going to label it, but really what can we do from a dysfunction standpoint? And one of the things I wanted to share here is just, this was actually an older paper in Scientific America back in 2009, and it was by Aliso Fasano. He's pretty well known for his research in autoimmunity. But the big thing is what they found with celiac disease. And you can see here, you have the environmental trigger with this gluten, which you can remove the environmental trigger. You can't change the genetic predisposition, but most of these individuals with all these other autoimmune issues have this intestinal permeability. And so when you look at the intestinal barrier, and this was a study published a few years ago, but what's interesting is your stomach has 2 mucus layers and your colon has 2, but your small intestine only has 1. And we're absorbing a lot of our nutrients in there, so it makes it more vulnerable to having issues. And when you look at the picture to the left, we already talked about dysbiosis, different processed foods, and medications that can play a role. But essentially what happens is that intestinal barrier gets compromised, and what do we have on the other side is our immune system. So we have these proteins, and it can basically translocate across the intestinal barrier, and you make these immune complexes to it, which causes inflammation and just systemic type issues with autoimmunity. So what determines what type of autoimmune issue someone has versus someone else is really that the biochemical individuality and their genetics. But ultimately, no matter what autoimmune issue you have, you're most likely going to have these issues with certain nutrient deficiencies, intestinal barrier type issues, and we can kind of take a similar approach with it. So when you're thinking about what tests can be done, you definitely want to see your specialist or your traditional doctors for a diagnosis of if you want your label. However, if you're really trying to understand, well, do I have intestinal permeability, or do I have a dysbiosis in my gut? What are the beneficial bacteria in my GI? You're really going to have to work with either a functional medicine practitioner, a naturopath, or a nutritionist that has experience working with some of these different specialty labs, because they're essentially investigational by insurance companies, and they're not typically the normal types of tests that you're going to get done if you went to see your traditional doctor. So it really needs to be an integrative approach. And I put this one article about the diet and autoimmunity. I don't have an answer on the correct diet. It really has to be personalized. And when you think about the AIP diet, it's a great diet to do for, almost like an elimination for a short period of time for a few months. And because essentially this type of diet, if you're going to apply it to everyone with a certain group, it really has to work for everyone. And so in those cases, it has to be the most restrictive. But if you're working with a lot of these integrative practitioners, you may have some more personalized testing where you may tolerate some of these other foods, and it doesn't have to be as restrictive. But a lot of the research has been done around more of the Mediterranean diets that we know, just because they're anti-inflammatory type diets. And when you look at these other diets around the world, they have a lot of these different spices and polyphenols and things that the Western diet doesn't have. And so those are the important things, because those polyphenols are going to act as like prebiotics. They're going to feed the beneficial bacteria. And I think what's pretty cool is there was this Russian biologist, L.A. Metrikov, which back in 1907, which is over a century ago, he basically hypothesized that replacing the bacteria in the gut, you can normalize the bowel health and prolong life. And here he was essentially talking about probiotics, really. But today we have this rampant antibiotic use, or I should say inappropriate use of it, usually mainly in viral type infections. We never had so much food available, but we never starved our microbiome so much. And before refrigeration, we had to really store foods using fermentation. And so our guts don't really have the same, it's not really the same landscape it was before we start doing a lot of this processing. So many people who have chronic disease or chronic disease states are no longer eating the foods that our earlier ancestors were doing. So, and then we also have to think about like the seeding. You know, when a child's born and they're delivered from a C-section, you're not getting that proper seeding. And so you're starting to see a lot of these different probiotic manufacturers and suppliers, you know, actually going at looking at what they can do to help these individuals with that. You're seeing a lot of things with human milk oligosaccharides, HMO as a prebiotic, and a lot of other bacteria that way. But when we look about different digestive function and dysfunction, you know, ultimately we got to make sure that we're making sure that things are moving along. And when we think about the paleo diet, and even with my history with Designs for Health, it was originally an education type company over 30 years ago, and it's really a paleo company. And so it really resonates with a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. But if you think about it, like there was this evolutionary shift with the paleo diet to these, you know, highly processed foods, low fiber, high sugar, and really out of convenience, and it really impacts the GI. And so I know Lindsey mentioned the importance of hydration, and you really need that water intake because that's going to help with that transit time. And then as far as just fiber content of food, if you look at the Paleolithic type fiber consumption from the research, they actually ate close to 100 grams of fiber a day. And you look at the RDA, 25 to 35. So 25 is really your minimum that you want to get. And you know, anything above that, but I know we talked about probably hitting around 50 would be kind of ideal. And when you see that here, it's not just about autoimmunity. It's when you're eating protein and you're eating these fiber foods, number one, it affects the glycemic load. It shows how it affects how the foods are actually being absorbed. And it's going to help with a lot of other different types of chronic disease states and things as well. So as far as constipation, because I know there was some concerns with, if I get too much fiber, can that contribute to constipation? And there are definitely some individuals where, you know, when they have that slow transit variant, and Lindsey kind of alluded to her in her presentation, where or some people that are on certain medications, you have to look at that, and certain supplements even can affect constipation. And so it's about really trying to make sure that you're not increasing things too quickly. We're getting the adequate water intake, and then obviously work with someone that, you know, you can modify things with. So and then I would also say, and I'm going to talk about that in my next slide or so, about different resistant starches as well as probiotic and some postbiotics, because if you don't tolerate these things initially, you can supplement with some of these other things in conjunction to it until you can maybe tolerate it or do something more from a synergistic perspective. Resistant starches, as the name implies, are resistant to digestion in the small bowel. And so once they reach the large intestine, they're basically fermented into the short chain fatty acids. And so they're going to be both beneficial to the microbes as well as the enterocytes of the gut. And they have a lot of different health benefits around, like healthy gut motility, microbial balance, blood sugar metabolism, intestinal permeability. So these are all things that you can do. So a lot of times, like, you know, what are resistant starches? I mean, there are different types of potato starches, or You have things such as like green banana flour that you'll often see that people will use. And those are definitely things that people can do if you can tolerate that type of thing on your diet, but they often don't cause the same type of bloating that you're going to get, especially if someone had like a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth and you wanted to try some sort of fiber supplement. This would probably be less likely of an issue. And then one of the things I'll mention too, when Lindsey showed that label with the Metamucil, and she didn't like those other ingredients, but it also had the maltodextrin that you kind of had it next to, and the citric acid, which they're both corn sources, right? So corn tends to cross-react with gluten, and a lot of, autoimmunity, we know that's a problem with. And so it just goes to show you can have a good ingredient potentially, but then when you add all these other things to it, it can actually make things, essentially worse. So one of the things I want to talk about probiotics is there's not a specific one strain that's going to be necessarily, in my opinion, more beneficial for an individual with autoimmunity. You have to look at it as like an orchestra and not a solo violinist. And our microbiome has so many hundreds and trillions of cells that, sure, there's research on maybe like one specific research genus, species, and strain ID on like helping with regularity, or you may see one with lowering triglycerides, or you're seeing stuff with mood, and they're getting into some of these more featured things. But when you're talking about really changing the microbiome, what happens is the adult microbiome is actually pretty stable, and it's hard to somewhat move that. But then with autoimmunity, you'll see a lot of the research, there's these dynamic shifts in the microbiome where they can shift, relatively, more frequently. And what happens is when you take probiotics, most of us are taking lactobacillus and bifidobacter because those are the bacteria that you can actually put in a bottle and can be shelf stable because they're facultative anaerobes, meaning they can be exposed to oxygen and still survive. 95% of your bacteria in your microbiome are anaerobes. So you can't put those other commensal bacteria in a capsule. And so you can't think of just the CFU number that's just going to go into your stomach and start magically making bacteria. What it's actually doing is, and they have really good benefits, but what they're doing is they're acting as like mucosal signaling. So it's kind of this immune type signaling that it does, that it has all these different effects. And sure, it can crowd out pathogenic bacteria and provide all these other things. But a lot of research shows the symbiotics combining pre with probiotics tends to be a little bit stronger with it. And I would say if you're looking at any sort of bacteria, look for ones that have like a strain ID at the end of it. So have a genus, species, and then it will have a number after it, because those are ones that are clinically studied and have research with it. And then the only other thing I wanted to point out with probiotics is a lot of us are familiar with, or may be familiar with, Saccharomyces boulardii. It's a non-pathogenic yeast, but essentially it is something that we often think about for if you have traveler's diarrhea, or you go to the drugstore and you're on antibiotics. Even the traditional doctors will sometimes prescribe you that. But if you look to the right, there's actually quite a bit of research on Sac boulardii with a lot of different autoimmunity conditions like inflammatory bowel disease. But it does things that are different than just your lacto and bifido. It has a lot of other different properties on intestinal barrier function. And so it's one of my kind of more favorite probiotics to use in individuals. And then the last thing is really these postbiotics. And postbiotics, and Lindsey mentioned butyrate, because that's probably the most common one that we're familiar with. But again, it's a short chain fatty acid. And normally when you think about it from a supplementation standpoint, it's available as sodium butyrate, but you don't really get as good efficacy because it doesn't really get past the small bowel. So there are some different formulas out there that have it more in clinically researched materials that will get to the colon. But this is for those types of people that I would consider supplementation with butyrate when you have that hard time digesting the fiber and you have the autoimmune issues with IBD, and while you're trying to work into those types of things, this could be an alternative to. Or let's say you're an athlete and you're trying to, you have a competition and you may have IBS type symptoms and you're not able to get adequate fire for whatever reason, that this can be an issue as well. But those are some of the things to consider. And I don't want to go too much into you know, other things. I mean, I have a couple slides on like contact info and Instagram and sing with a couple of products, but I think we'll just turn it over to any questions.
Well, and really quick, I just want to pop in, Dr. Michael, something that you said during your presentation that really stuck out to me was how really right now in the modern world, we're more overfed and undernourished than ever before, which is really the antithesis, you know, to health. So, you know, even with that being said and being able to incorporate more nutrient dense foods into your diet, which we're all about here at Paleo on the Go, of course, do you two want to maybe suggest your favorite fiber sources to the audience, preferably some that are AIP compliant? Like, I know for me, I love avocado.
Yeah. Dr. Mike, do you want to kick it off and then I'll follow suit?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'll be honest. I mean, like what got me into functional medicine in the first place was autoimmunity, and I had you know, positive antibodies for a thyroid autoimmunity, which I was able to kind of, you know, change that trajectory where it never really affected me that way. But like I don't do the super strict AIP, but you know, with that being said, you know, I've been gluten-free for over 12 years, and as far as like those different dietary fibers, I mean, sure, things that probably wouldn't be as compliant in the seed type stuff, it would be like the flax and the chia, which could be good after you come out of that phase. But I think the bigger thing that I kind of just focus on with a lot of people is, sure, we can give you a list of like the high amounts of high fiber foods, but at the end of the day, like I'm eating like, you know, I'm eating broccoli like every day, or I may have some zucchini and some other types of veggies. And they think about like other like berries, like blackberries, raspberries, besides the avocado, even though from a fiber perspective, those bright fruits, they don't have a ton of fructose like mango or fig do. But what they do is those polyphenols actually will feed the beneficial bacteria, like a prebiotic, specifically Akkermansia. And we see Akkermansia relatively low in a lot. With some people, it's high with autoimmune, but others you see it being low. But it's a keystone species, which is really important for the mucus layer in the small bowel. So, you know, I tend to just, I mean, I'm dealing with a lot of people that are eating a lot of processed foods and products. So I'm just trying to focus on like, okay, eat whole foods and really get them going from that perspective.
And because it's really not about being perfect, it is about making those subtle changes and kind of moving in the right direction. Lindsey, what are some of your favorite AIP fiber sources?
I'll just share the meal that I most recently had, because I would say I used to eat 6 times a day when I was competing. I no longer do that. I actually have my my thoughts as to why maybe 6 times a day may not be optimal for everyone's health as it relates to the migrating motor complex, but that's besides the point. The point is, in each meal, I try to get, because I only eat 3 to 4 times a day now, I try to get about 15 grams of fiber minimum per meal. So yesterday, one of my favorite things that I had from Paleo on the Go, actually, I love the butternut squash, and like mixing it with some of the chicken sausage. And then sometimes what I'll do is I'll just saute a bunch of veggies on the stove. I don't blast the heat. I'll lightly grease the pan with some coconut oil, not that that has fiber, but just to give you the visual of my meal. And then it's always like, I always try to include lots of different veggies. And every time I go to the store, I'm trying to say, oh, I haven't bought that veggie in a while. So sometimes it might be scallions and carrots and broccoli and cauliflower and Brussels sprouts and zucchini and beets. And these are all the things that I'll, you know, rotate through. And so I'll just chop them up and throw them on the stove in a big pan. And then I store them in the fridge in a Tupperware, and I have them for, you know, maybe 3 days after, because I cook in bulk. And then I just piece things together. I like make hodgepodges in my bowl. So the butternut squash soup from Paleo on the Go has some great fiber in it. Obviously, all those veggies have great fiber in it. And then I got to get my protein in there. And sometimes I'll do some, you know, a little bit of olive oil to drizzle. Personally, I have been able to reintroduce some so what I do is I try to make AIP my base, but I also try to incorporate, for the sake of increasing my diversity, I try to incorporate some foods that I am personally good with, such as flax seeds. And occasionally I'll do some pinto beans. I make sure they're pre-soaked and pressure cooked. Those are not AIP compliant. So if you are going strict AIP, you would not want to include those, but the goal would be to someday possibly reintroduce them. I will say beans do give people issues if they're not prepared properly. So the pre-soaked and pressure cooked is something to look for. But sometimes I'll like throw just like a tablespoon of that in because beans can otherwise be very healthy. Oh, you know what I love is, this is weird, but like I'll do the canned pumpkin and I'll do like a half a cup of berries, whatever berries they are. And I'll do coconut butter, which is from a coconut, but it actually has fiber. So its macronutrient composition is more fat and fiber. And so I'll just like put this, sometimes coconut flakes and sometimes coconut butter. And that's like my dessert. And, you know, it's how I've been able to live the last how many years, over 10 years without eating gluten or dairy or standard desserts or pizzas or stuff like that. So I really do, you know, live that dairy and gluten-free lifestyle. And when I made that switch 10 years ago, my health went from here to here after a couple months of making that transition. And I was like, wow, like I feel so much better. That was what started digging me out of my hole. So hopefully that gives people some ideas of different fiber things.
No, that was fantastic. And I think for a lot of us, we are more so on a modified AIP journey. But for some people, of course, depending on, you know, where they're at in their wellness journey right now, maybe they are doing that strict adherence. But, you know, Dr. Michael, you brought up a great point. The AIP diet is kind of that initial restriction. And, you know, in due time down the road, you do want to be able to incorporate more foods like beans. I am a huge fan of beans. And they are a great source of fiber. I saw a question come in. So is there a recommended fiber intake for someone with rheumatoid arthritis that takes, I think it's methotrexate? Is that too specific?
Well, I mean, I think I think it's just, it doesn't really change. You don't really change your diet necessarily from a fiber and how you're going to feed the microbiome, whether you have, you know, rheumatoid arthritis or any other autoimmune issue, right? It's and methotrexate, you know, it's a chemotherapeutic. It's kind of like the first line of defense that they give individuals before they put them on, like say Plaquenil and some of the other chemotherapeutics or biologics, I should say. But ultimately, like they're following the standard of care from the medication perspective. But then I would say they still want to, you know, feed their microbiome, right? And then they probably want to work with like a functional medicine practitioner if they want to dig deeper into what's going on in their gut, and then also look at the other nutritional deficiencies or insufficiencies that can actually play a role with modulating their immune response. So like, sure, the gut is huge because like it's 80% of your immune response from the intestinal barrier and all that other stuff. But we also have to make sure that like these individuals are getting, you know, adequate nutrients, and there are certain therapeutics like vitamin D and essential fatty acids where like you're going to probably have to supplement with therapeutically, and that it's not just a one piece of the puzzle with autoimmunity. It's kind of like you got 4 different holes in your roof, and we got to plug up like all 5 of them, and this is like plugging up 2 of them.
Yeah, and that was a great answer, and something I was thinking about, which is a little tangential to what they asked, but might be helpful information for them. And Dr. Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but methotrexate, being it depletes folate, is there any contraindication for why this person should not supplement with folate with methotrexate, or would that actually be something that would be very helpful? Is there any reason why supplementing with that somehow makes the medication ineffective because it does block folate? Is that correct?
Yeah. So, I mean, most of the people that are prescribed it for like rheumatoid arthritis are usually going to get prescribed like Deplin or some sort of folate with it, because because normally in chemotherapeutics, when you're thinking of cancer, you don't want to give people, you know, therapeutic doses of folate because it's something that is actually, you know, it's cell proliferative, right? And now in healthy individuals, you know, we obviously want to have all those B vitamins and things like that, but most of those people will supplement separately with a folate, but ultimately, and it's usually Deplin, so it usually is like a methylfolate, so it's not the same, but yeah, that's not a problem.
Okay, so that is in fact something that the doctor usually does go ahead and address with them. That
yeah, and if because they have a prescription for it, and if they're not, I mean, we could from a practitioner standpoint, like they may look at your folate or B12 levels, just or homocysteine levels if you're just trying to see like B vitamin type status. But and I think in general we just need to. And just what I was saying at the AIP diet, I mean, if you're not working with a practitioner and you're doing your own research on autoimmunity and you're just going in the traditional world with like your standard of care, I mean, obviously you want to follow the AIP type diet initially and all that. It's just the reason I think we're probably saying more modified is because a lot of us that work individually with either clients or patients are often doing like individual type of like food sensitivity type testing and other GI stuff. So we can kind of personalize their diet a little bit more. But again, if we have to address everyone, then the AIP diet is a great elimination diet for all those people to start with.
Yeah. And a really cool story is I have a client with rheumatoid arthritis, not on methotrexate, but since eliminating nightshades specifically, their pain has really subsided. And I know there's that whole tie-in with nightshades seeming to flare up rheumatoid arthritis, possibly more than some other autoimmune conditions, but it was just really cool to kind of see that play out because they were doing gluten and dairy free, but they were eating nightshades daily, like potatoes and peppers. And once the nightshades were removed, the pain subsided significantly. So I just want to share that story for whoever has rheumatoid arthritis. It's worth a shot.
That's a great point. And that would be because of the lectins, right?
I would say that's probably, Dr. Mike, what is your take on that, on nightshades and rheumatoid arthritis?
I mean, I would say it's a good thing to eliminate to start with people. And then it's probably going to be, a lot of these things are going to be individualized, going forward. So I don't like to put everything as an all or none with anyone. But one of the interesting things, since you brought up methotrexate, when you look at like other different dietary factors that can play a role with autoimmunity, like normally coffee is relatively protective as an antioxidant and everything, or it has no effect in a negative way for autoimmunity. However, specifically with rheumatoid arthritis, it actually can exacerbate it only because it works with the methotrexate. So when you take in more than 180 milligrams of caffeine per day, it can lower the efficacy of the medication. So it's more of like the interaction with caffeine and methotrexate that can play a role there. I mean, it's not that coffee's bad and you don't take them, you could go with decaf or not drink 180 milligrams of caffeine from it, but that's just one of those things to potentially think about.
Yeah. And with your answer, it made me think about how regarding the one size fits all doesn't apply. What I think there's, no replacement for sometimes is try something and see how you respond, because the body is so complex that there's millions of different variables that are going in to give an output. And sometimes just giving something a trial run, as long as it's not going to hurt you, right? So like, you don't want to give a trial run of like, hey, I'm going to go on the carnivore diet for a year and see what happens. Like, the carnivore diet's a whole other story, but yeah, I mean, I know people have reported they've gone on the carnivore diet and have seen their autoimmunity come way down. And I could understand maybe there's a reduced inflammatory load going in the body, but is the carnivore diet meant to be on for an extended period of time? No. So, but anyway, the point is, if you want to trial something, as long as you have consulted with a doctor, healthcare practitioner to make sure that it's not going to harm you, then sometimes that can be a great way to see what your body needs.
Well, and Lindsey, you bring up a great point, really the comparison with the carnivore diet and AIP. And we do have a future webinar that's coming up where we're going to be talking about the benefits of both. But to really both of your points and something that Dr. Michael mentioned, it's that elimination of the processed foods and incorporating more whole foods that's going to benefit everyone, no matter what they're following, whatever specific diet it is.
Yep. Keep it simple, right? That is, yeah. Wow. Time flies. I
know. You guys want to share where our audience can find you, kind of do your plug?
Dr. Mike, I know you said you have a couple of slides at the end. If you want to toss those up, share your screen, and then I can share my screen after to just show up the contact info.
Sure. I mean, I have 2 slides here that just have some generic like supplementation support, and this isn't supposed to be any sort of like advertisement, but I just wanted to kind of say there are a couple products out there that can modulate the immune system that have curcumin, vitamin D, and fish oil. So, I mean, I would say optimizing your fish oil and vitamin D and taking curcumin are three therapeutics that I find with a lot of patients are going to make a huge difference with at least knocking out like 2 or maybe like 30% of like the autoimmune issues. And then when you look at intestinal permeability support, there are a lot of good products out there like glutamine, which is the main fuel of colonicytes, sac boulardii I talked about, and then really any sort of other intestinal barrier support that has like those mucilaginous sluggish botanicals that Lindsey kind of mentioned before, like your marshmallow, your slippery elm, okra, cat's claw, all these things that kind of gunk up or plug up these T cell receptors and block that immune response. But as far as you know, where people can kind of reach me on social, I'm on at Dr. Michael Jurgowitz on Instagram. This is my QR code, and then my website's thefunctionalmedicine.center.com. And I'll get you share your screen now.
Yeah, and I will say I have no affiliation with Designs for Health, and I love their products, and I tend to choose their products most of the time when there's one available because of the research that goes into it and the quality. And the quality of supplements is so important. And I wish more people appreciated and understood that, because getting a random fish oil off the shelf, not only could it potentially be harmful if they haven't tested it for heavy metals or if they've put some of these dyes in there, but the dosage is really important. And you know, someone's like, oh, I'm taking fish oil. And I'm like, well, let me see how much you're taking. And they're taking like, oh, it's so sad sometimes, like 0.1 grams or something every other day. And it's like, well, that's not really going to do what we needed to do here. And it's like hardly any DHA in it. So anyway, long story short is the quality of the supplements does matter. So let me share my screen here and I will show you how you can get in touch if you have a question on anything. And I would say the best ways would be my website or Instagram. My website is NuTriDayFitness.com or Instagram is at LindseyDayFitness. You can always shoot me a message on there. And I love talking about health and fitness, and a lot of the questions that people give me inspire me to put out different content. So right now I have no life because I'm studying for my exam, but as soon as I'm done studying for my exam, like I will be putting out more content when I am not studying 10 hours a day, which that will be nice.
And Lindsey does do a lot of like guest blogs for Paleo on the Go as well. So check out our blog. There's a lot of great info from her on there. I want to give another shout out to our panelists, Dr. Michael and Lindsey. You two provided so many tidbits of knowledge and good takeaway tips for everyone. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you everyone for being present with us and really allowing us to join you on your healing journey. We're very proud to be able to help you guys. And like I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, all of our attendees will receive an email after the event with a promo code discount for $20 off your next order. That's going to be with Fiber25, and you'll receive everything in the email. And yeah, we have a lot of exciting gut health centric wellness webinars coming up, comparing different, diets like the carnivore diet, AIP, and just a lot of things. So stay tuned for that. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And I hope everyone has a great day. If Lindsey or Dr. Michael have anything else, if you guys want to let our audience know.
So thank you. And thank you not only to Paleo on the Go, but to Dr. Mike. I've learned so much from him at my time at University of Bridgeport. And he, gave so much great value throughout my semester learning from him and more great value today. So I really am, appreciative to have people that have paved the way in this field. So thank you, Paleo on the Go. Thank you, Dr. Mike. And I look forward to the next one.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, guys, have a good one.